to docket 0764.
Docket number 0764. The Committee on Government Operations, to which was referred on May 16, 2018, docket number 0764, an ordinance allowing short-term rentals in the City of Boston, submits a report recommending the ordinance ought to pass in a new draft.
Just to set a couple of ground rules, because apparently there's going to be some fireworks at the council today. Not having it. So I want to tell you this. I want to recognize the advocacy of every single person who is here and who could not attend this meeting today. I know it is an issue that everyone cares about, as well as my colleagues and the staff who work for my colleagues. So we want to be respectful. So I ask everyone to hold any applause, shouting, to listen, because I know I have some other things that might be coming forward from other councilors. I want everyone to be able to hear those remarks and to be able to listen to those remarks. And then, of course, we as councilors have to take votes on these remarks. So I just ask everyone to be respectful of each other and to thank everyone for packing this house today. I really appreciate it. Councilor Flaherty, the chairman of the Committee on Government Operations, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Docket 0764, an ordinance allowing short-term residential rentals in the City of Boston, was sponsored by Mayor Martin Walsh and referred to the Committee on Government Operations back on May the 16th, 2018. The Committee on Government Operations held a working session on docket 0764 on May 21st of 2018. Docket 0764 provides a framework to allow and regulate short-term rentals in the city through a registration process under the jurisdiction of the Inspectional Services Department. It establishes three categories of short-term rentals, which are home share units, limited share unit, and owner-adjacent unit. It should be noted that this ordinance does not allow for investor units, but does allow for exempt residential units that have been furnished and contracted for institutional and business stays. The proposal also prohibits residential units such as income-restricted units from short-term rentals. The proposal exempts residential units such as licensed lodging houses, existing bed and breakfast from being part of this docket. There are also registration fees and penalties and other protections, for example, right to a hearing, in place for both city and short-term rental operators. The committee heard from the Department of Neighborhood Development's Chief Sheila Dillon, Inspectional Services Commissioner William Christopher, IGR Policy Analyst Christopher English, DeWitt Chief Patricia Boyle McKenna, and Chief of Policy Joyce Linehan, all whom spoke on behalf of Mayor Walsh's administration. My colleagues and I, along with the administration, have heard from members of the public that attended not only working sessions on this docket, but also took into consideration comments and suggestions that were stated in a prior lengthy public hearing on a previous docket, which was then followed up with 2 public working sessions on the same subject matter. Additionally, throughout a transparent and detailed and thorough committee process over the last 5 months, we heard from an array of stakeholders who have expressed their concern, along with offering testimony both in favor and against this proposal. My role as the chair is to be fair and objective throughout the collective legislative process, taking into consideration all viewpoints, as well as all prospective amendments that were presented to the council, and giving everyone an opportunity to be heard. What I forwarded in this amended version of the docket takes into account the impartial totality of both the sum and substance of the testimonies and suggestions that were presented to the Boston City Council. And so as a result of that testimony, the committee is presenting a new draft with the following amendments: adding a sentence to update the definition of short-term rental registries to provide notice and transparency while addressing privacy concerns; amending subsection D to allow an owner-adjacent unit to offer their owner-adjacent unit as a short-term rental for 365 days a year; adding a sentence at the end of subsection A that requires the Inspectional Service Department to submit to the short-term rental registry and make that available electronically within 30 days. And also adding new language in section 2 that requires the Commissioner of Inspectional Services to annually prepare a report detailing the activities of the short-term rental registry, which will be filed in the clerk's office beginning June 30th, 2019. Our hope is at some point after the annual reporting that we may be able to go to biannual or quarterly, but the stepping off point was to work with the Commissioner of Inspectional Services, allow him and his team to kind of get the process started. It is my intention that the amended legislation has been filled with issues that not only address many aspects of a growing industry, but also assist in alleviating the burdens that are placed on the rental housing market in our growing city. The next year will be a learning period to see how this ordinance has impacted the industry as well as our city. And if needed, we, as the members of Boston City Council, working with the administration, can revisit the conversation to take further action or to file further amendments. So it's one of the things where not everyone is going to be completely pleased, but I did the best to try to get and find that middle ground for our colleagues and for all the stakeholders and members of the public. So as the chair of the Committee on Government Operations, I recommend that docket 0764 ought to pass in a new draft. Thank you, Madam President.
At this time, I'm going to take a quick recess. Everyone can take their seats, that would be great. Just some points of clarification. So, Councilor Flaherty, thank you for your report and recommendation. At this time, I know that there are various colleagues who want to offer up amendments to what has been recommended by the chair of the Committee on Government Operations. At this time, Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor. Actually, hold on one second. Madam Clerk, if you could read the two amendments that Councilor O'Malley is offering into the record, and then Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor. Thank you.
The first amendment from Councilor Matt O'Malley, on docket number 0764. Docket 0764 as amended shall be further amended as follows. In 9-14-5.5, requirements for short-term rental, subsection D, of an owner-adjacent unit, the 365 days per year will be capped at 120 days per the original proposal. D, short-term rental of any owner-adjacent unit, an operator may offer their own adjacent unit as a short-term rental for up to 120 days, consecutive or non-consecutive days per year, filed in the council on June 13th, 2018. Amendment of Councilor Matt O'Malley on docket number 0764. Docket 0764 as amended shall be further amended as follows. New language is added in section 2 to further specify requirements, adding the following language. 1, in the first sentence following the words Commissioner of ISD in consultation with DND and do it, and 2, by adding the following language after the last sentence following the word council. The report shall estimate the impact of 9-14.5 subsection D on the number of units removed from the long-term housing stock, the number of evictions caused by such conversions from long-term housing to short-term rentals, the increase in home prices and rents in the relevant categories of owner-occupied 2 and 3 family homes, the differential between annual short-term rental revenue and annual long-term rental revenue in an owner-adjacent unit, and future projections of these impacts. Said report shall, to the extent practicable, disintegrate information neighborhood by neighborhood and other relevant categories. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam President. And just a point of parliamentary inquiry, I should speak on both of these, and then we will vote on them individually?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President, Madam Clerk. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a fan of the game Jenga. I'm sure many of you are as well. It's a block game where you have blocks that sit crisscrossed on one another. It builds a tower. The purpose of the game is to remove the blocks one by one so that you take down the tower. Now, I mention this because I think it's an analogous situation to crafting legislation. If you pull a block at the wrong time or at the wrong juncture, the whole thing can collapse. And while I appreciate the chairman of Government Ops and think there's a lot of good things in his revised ordinance, I think that there could be potentially something that could cause all blocks to fall. And I'm talking, of course, about removing the 120-day cap and allowing for 365 or unlimited nights during the course of a year. I'm proposing an amendment today which would reinstate that 120-day cap on owner-adjacent short-term rentals. As many of you know, in the original proposal from the Walsh administration, it was 90 days. Then in the revised one, it went to 120 days. And now in the most recent revised one that's before us right now, it's gone to 365 days. Now, this process has been productive in educating all of us on the dangers of investor Airbnb downtown, as well as the benefits of Airbnb and similar platforms for owner-occupied landlords. These are both critically important. But if we remove the 120-day cap on Airbnb in this ordinance, we are condemning our outer neighborhoods and many of our most vulnerable residents to the unintended consequences. My district and many of yours includes 2- and 3-family homes where landlords who live in one unit rent out the rest of their building to the working class of our city. New immigrants, young people, artists, bartenders, other renters not yet able to own a home. The combination of home ownership and working-class renters is not new to our city. It's how my family grew up. It's how many of your families grew up. It's how residential neighborhoods have thrived as mixed-income communities for hundreds of years. Now, today I recognize that we have an innovation economy that I have always supported, and I'm a frequent user myself. But we're choosing today on how to implement the innovation economy for the benefit of all Boston residents, so I ask you to consider the unintended consequences of having no caps in our neighborhoods, particularly our outer neighborhoods. By banning most Airbnbs in larger buildings while allowing unlimited Airbnbs in owner-adjacent units of triple-deckers, we push the conversions, the rent increases, and the evictions, from Chinatown to Roslindale, from the North End to Roxbury, from Back Bay to East Boston. By eliminating the cap, we change a local landlord's economic interest. They will make far more money by having a short-term Airbnb-type platform to tourists than renting out these units to a long-term tenant. By eliminating the cap, we also push up the price of buying a home. Our neighborhood triple-deckers are sold right now based on the value of their rent. If they are sold based on the far higher value of year-round Airbnbs, buying a home will cost more and be even further out of reach. In our outer neighborhoods, local landlords who live downstairs and rent out upstairs rent to nurses, artists, bartenders. But by now they've started to use that upstairs for Airbnb instead. And this is important to note. We shouldn't look at the figures about how many triple-deckers in outer neighborhoods are currently using Airbnb and other type platforms, but what the potential could be. Ford Cavallari, who many of you know, or all of us know by now, estimates that with a 120-day cap, 2% of these 2- and 3-family units will convert to Airbnb. With no cap, we could be looking at closer to 10% of units. That's 1,700 homes changing from renters to tourists. That's almost the 2,000 units that we expected to get back. This is the unintended consequence that I hope we all take seriously. So I urge you to please support me in this amendment. I hope you will vote with me to stop from turning Boston to a neighborhood into many hotels in the outer neighborhoods. You should be able to make money owning your home and renting it out to people, and you should be able to take advantage of Airbnb, and that's why we allowed for 120 up from 90. But again, I think that there is tremendous peril should this pass as 365. Urge you to join me in 120. The second amendment, very briefly, this is a little bit more straightforward. This has to deal with reporting. I respect, obviously, everyone's support for short-term rentals in 2- and 3-family homes, and we know there are many sides of this issue. But the second amendment that will be before us includes D&D and DO-IT along with ISD to report the council 6 months after the ordinance goes into effect, should it go into effect. Given its impact on our housing market and the technology needed to enforce it, I believe that this is a very important addition. Earlier, I just laid out some of the potential impacts of removing the 120-day cap, and this amendment allows us to track how this ordinance affects renters, homebuyers, homeowners, and the overall housing stock. In particular, it calls for tracking impacts for our different neighborhoods in order to see how every block in the city is affected. Data collection could itself deter bad actors from finding loopholes in our regulation because they know they'll be caught. In voting on this important ordinance, each of us is making a prediction on how Airbnb and this regulation will impact our city. Even though I don't agree with everything on it, I think, as I said, tremendous credit to the chairman for putting together something that's thoughtful, and I hope that these two amendments are added to it to make it an even stronger ordinance. Thank you, Madam President.
No, thank you, Council O'Malley. At this time, Council Wu, would you like to speak on Council O'Malley's amendment? Perfect. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and I just want to, I'm going to try not to speak on every amendment, so I'm going to do some summary remarks now and then hopefully just vote each time afterwards.
No, you can speak on every amendment as they come up. It makes it easier.
Well, overall, I just want to say that this has been a long process for the city of Boston and a lot of hours of work for so many across the city. So I do want to thank Mayor Walsh and the administration so much for all the time and research they put in. I want to thank Councilor Flaherty for shepherding all of us through a lot of learning and discussions and really working hard to make sure that every perspective was heard through his public process that he ran. I want to thank Councilor Edwards, who's been my partner in thinking through changes from the beginning on this, as well as all the advocates, some of whom were already mentioned, for doing incredible amounts of outside research, both quantitative, anecdotal, field, sort of secret shopping research on Airbnb. We have learned so much from the city, so much about the city thanks to all of your work. And I hope this partnership can continue onto other issues as well. So I just wanted to say that. I was very public in supporting the mayor's proposed language, which included the provision that Councilor O'Malley is hoping to reinstate with his amendment. It is, the 120-day cap is something that I have actually evolved on. So I want to clarify and put out there that what I think is most important is reasonable regulation that we enact today to limit the loopholes. We need legislation passed at the end of all of these amendments that eliminates the investor units from Boston's market and also limits it to owner occupants. So what I'm saying is that we'll be voting this way and that way at the end. If this amendment does not survive, I will still support Councilor Flaherty's recommended version as well. But I want to explain why I do think that this amendment is important and why my thinking has changed on it. When Councilor Edwards and I had proposed our original amendment, it did not include a cap on these owner-adjacent units. I have since learned about a new co-hosting model that a lot of the platforms are implementing. This allows for owner-occupants who would fit into our framework to very easily partner with or be contacted by or have corporations reach out to them in order to set up a new business model. And the reality is that we're not quite sure what the impacts will be on the 2- and 3-family, the sort of housing stock outside of downtown, because we don't know how quickly demand will change, how much the first part of our regulation, eliminating investor units, will impact the neighborhoods. What we do know is that the corporations and the platforms are already changing to accommodate that. They're already creating the mechanisms to be able to reach out to every 2- or 3-family owner-occupant on the street and say, could we, for just a cut of your profit, do everything for you and make it much easier than it is right now to manage those properties? Again, changing, getting away from that original vision of pure home sharing. There is a possibility without the cap that we will end up with these horizontal hotels of many units on a street through partnership models continue to be operated as de facto hotels. We don't know if this will happen, and that's the big uncertainty. I think some of the disagreement is many of us, as I thought before, as my original thinking was that the downtown demand won't easily translate into the neighborhoods because distance from transit, distance from a lot of the tourist activities, but because of that big uncertainty, I am going to be voting to err on the side of a more restrictive and more limited piece of legislation to start with. It will be very difficult. I know we'll try to continue staying up to date and adjusting as we go along, but a year from now, 2 years from now, it will be difficult to continue taking things away from new business opportunities that have arisen in the loopholes that we have left open. So again, I support the efforts of our chair here and the efforts of the council as a whole to get something done today because we desperately need action to stem the flow of future units being sucked into the de facto hotel markets. But I will be supporting Councilor O'Malley's amendment heartily with both amendments, but particularly the cap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Wu, very much. Councilor Baker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I agree with the statement that the removing the cap will push this business into the neighborhoods. but I will not be voting for the First Amendment. But the Second Amendment, I would like to commend Councilor O'Malley on this one, because we're going into this discussion here without any data. It's a data-driven society here. We haven't seen anything on positive impacts, negative impacts. We can possibly see the negative impacts in certain areas, but you can also see the positive impact. So thank you for the data. Hopefully when the data comes in, we can revisit this honestly, and thank you, Madam Chair. And good job, Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Anyone else wishing to speak on the two amendments offered by Councilor O'Malley? We will take a vote on each of them separately, starting with a 120-day cap. Is there a second? Councilor Zakhem has second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Nay. Thank you all. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll. And a vote, if we could clarify what a vote yes means and what a vote no means, that would be great.
A vote for yes means you accept the amendment as written by Councilor O'Malley, and a no vote says you reject the amendment. And this is the 120-day cap. Councilor Baker?
No.
Councilor Baker, no. Councilor Campbell?
No.
Councilor Campbell, no. Councilor Siomo? No. Councilor Siomo, no. Councilor Edwards? No. Councilor Edwards, no. Councilor Asabi George? Yes. Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty? No. Councilor Flaherty, no. Councilor Flynn? No. Councilor Flynn, no. Councilor Janey? No. Councilor Janey, no. Councilor McCarthy? No. Councilor McCarthy, no. Councilor O'Malley? Yes. Councilor O'Malley, yes. Councilor Presley? Yes. Councilor Presley, yes. Councilor Wu? Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. And Councilor Zakhem? Yes. Councilor Zakhem, yes. Madam President, we have 5 in the affirmative and 8 in the negative.
Say again.
The First Amendment does not pass.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The First Amendment does not pass. Moving on to the Second Amendment, which has to do with data collection and reporting. Is there a second? Second. There is a second from Councilor McCarthy. All those in favor of the Second Amendment say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Nay. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll.
Thank you, Madam President. Councilor Baker?
Yes.
Councilor Baker, yes. Councilor Campbell?
Yes.
Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Siomo? Councilor Siomo, yes. Councilor Edwards? Yes. Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George? Yes. Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty? No. Councilor Flaherty, no. Councilor Flynn? Yes. Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Janey? Yes. Councilor Janey, yes. Councilor McCarthy? Yes. Councilor McCarthy, yes. Councilor O'Malley? Yes. Councilor O'Malley, yes. Councilor Presley? Yes. Councilor Presley, yes. Councilor Wu? Councilor Wu, yes. And Councilor Zakhem? Yes. Councilor Zakhem, yes. Madam President, the Second Amendment of Councilor O'Malley on docket number 0764 has received 12 votes in the affirmative and 1 vote in the negative.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Second Amendment offered by Councilor Matt O'Malley has been adopted. Moving on.
Okay, so.
Councilor Wu, you have the floor.
Okay, hold on. Just pieces of paper. Thank you, Madam President. I wish to offer an amendment that would include 2 provisions. The first.
Oh, I apologize. Again, we have to read these into the record.
Oh, sorry. Please.
Sorry about that. Madam Clerk, if you could read Councilor Wu's proposed amendment into the record.
Thank you, Madam President. Amendment of Councilor Michelle Wu on docket 0764, amended draft. Docket 0764 as amended shall be further amended as follows. 1, in section 19-14.5, requirements for short-term rentals, delete the following phrase, other than in the case of an operator owning an owner-adjacent unit. And 2, in section 3, add the following subsection, A, sunset period for existing units contracted for short-term rentals, residential units with executed leases for short-term rentals as of June 1st, 2018, and that are not on the ineligible unit list defined by section 9-14.4A above may continue to operate until the completion of the lease term or until September 1st, 2019, whichever date is first.
Councilor Wu, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to offer an amendment to now the amended draft of the ordinance that would have two provisions. The first would eliminate the ability of an owner-occupant of a 2 or 3 family home to offer 2 full units at the same time, meaning that someone who is in a triple-decker and lives on the first floor and wants to have a tenant on the second floor and Airbnb the top floor, they could Airbnb the top floor 365 days a year. They could Airbnb the extra bedrooms within their unit 365 days a year. But if they wanted to take advantage of putting their entire primary resident unit on the market as well while they're on vacation or gone for the summer, which they're allowed to as up to 90 days, they would not be able to do 2 full units for the full 90 days. My reasoning behind this is that the justification for the owner adjacent unit is that we're essentially treating that extra unit within the 2 or 3 family home as an extra bedroom in that person's house. They live there, they're on site, and it's a small house, so what happens in that one piece of it has a big impact on their cash flow. So if we are treating it as an extra bedroom, I believe that that person should be on site when they offer the extra unit. So if you are going, if your tendency is to go to Florida for 3 months a year or go to wherever for the entire summer, we don't want that 2-family to turn into a de facto hotel for the entirety of the 90 days that you're able to do that under the existing language. So this would just tighten it up by a little bit to say, feel free 365 days a year to put your extra unit up, to put all the extra bedrooms in your own unit up, but if you're not on site, you can only do 1 full unit at a time. The second provision is a sunset period for the existing units. And this is something that I'm sort of surprised to see myself offering because I've been squarely on the side of wanting to tighten this up as much as possible. But through many conversations with the Host Alliance and others who are in this business, have learned that there are many considerations and long-term agreements and contracts, sometimes multi-years, that have been signed that have an impact on people's mortgages, on people's ability to keep ownership of their homes. So this provision would extend the date out for those who have a pre-existing lease agreement as of this month to September. So the effective date would still be January for registration, for everything else, so no one should be accepting new bookings or continuing to build their business. But if you're having those conversations about firing employees or losing business opportunities, this gives people that extra bit of time to run their leases until the next rental cycle. It's a little bit tight to find a new tenant in a lot of those cases because a lot of the September leases are starting to be signed now or will be signed in the next couple of weeks. So I offer both of them together because it was important for me that the first one was tied to the second. I know there's some question about whether there's a division, and I'll make decisions from there, but did want to recognize and acknowledge that our decisions today will have an impact on the business opportunities and limiting the money that people will make. And if we can ease that for the businesses in a way that is still respectful of the implementation as quickly as possible, I think that's a reasonable compromise. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Wu. Councilor Flaherty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Just move to divide the question, and obviously due respect to the previous speaker who did tremendous work. Her advocacy is why we're here today, and a big part of her thumbprint is on today's ordinance. But the amendment is actually 2 amendments. It's one involving Section 19-14.5, and the other one is Section 3. So my argument would be that we should divide the question. They're 2 separate and distinct amendments. One that's found on page 4 of the ordinance, and the other one I think is found on page 10. And just ask that we divide the question and take them as 2 separate amendments and 2 separate votes. Thank you, Madam President.
Councilor Flaherty, thank you. There's a second by Councilor Baker. This is in the discretion of the chair. The discretion of the chair, that being me, has the discretion to determine whether or not we should divide an amendment. This is in when it makes sense. And because I want to be consistent, everyone is offering amendments and doing them separately, and we're taking votes on them separately. So at this point, I rule that we should divide the question. So we will take a vote on each of Councilor Wu's offered amendments separately. Does that make sense? Okay. Would you like to speak on? Just want to cite Rule 9, that's all. I'm invoking Rule 9. That's right. Thank you. And for the record, Madam Clerk, it is Rule 9, divide the question. At this time, I'm going to move to take,
Just to clarify, I may withdraw the second amendment if the first, depending on what happens with the first, but just wanted to put that out there.
okay. So starting with the first amendment, which has to do with deleting the language referring to other than in the case of an operator owning an owner adjacent unit. Is there a second for that amendment? Madam Clerk, if you could reflect that there is a second from Councilor O'Malley. All those in favor of adopting this, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Nay. Madam Clerk, thank you. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll on that first amendment. Thank you.
On Councilor Wu's First Amendment on docket number 0764. Councilor Baker? No. Councilor Baker? No. Councilor Campbell?
No.
Councilor Campbell, no. Councilor Siomo? No. Councilor Siomo, no. Councilor Edwards? Yes. Councilor Edwards, yes. Councilor Asabi George? Yes. Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty? No. Councilor Flaherty, no. Councilor Flynn? Yes. Councilor Flynn, yes. Councilor Janey? Yes. Councilor Janey, yes. Councilor McCarthy? No. Councilor McCarthy, no. Councilor O'Malley? Yes. Councilor O'Malley, yes. Councilor Presley? Yes. Councilor Presley, yes. Councilor Wu? Yes. Councilor Wu, yes. Councilor Zakhem? Yes. Councilor Zakhem, yes. 4, 6, 8. Madam President, the First Amendment on docket number 0764 of Councilor Wu had 7 votes in the affirmative and 5 votes in, no, that's not right.
Nope.
8 votes in the affirmative and
Yes.
5 votes in the negative.
Thank you. The first amendment offered by Councilor Wu has been adopted. Councilor Wu, do you still want to take a vote on the second, or do you want to withdraw the second amendment?
Yes, I want to recognize that Councilor Baker has also is planning to file the same one, so I'm happy to.
That's correct. Councilor Baker, would you like to speak as you were offering an amendment that is similar in language to Councilor Wu? On moving on to the second amendment offered by Councilor Wu, which is similar to the amendment that you were offering. Would you like to speak on that? This is the sunset provision. Yes. Okay. So just for clarification for the audience, Councilor Baker also offered an amendment similar to Councilor Wu on the sunset provision, so I'm allowing him to speak on that because they are the same.
Yes.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Wu, for putting this forward, to paying attention to the city's economy on this one. I think it would be, it might be a bad mistake if we had thousands of apartments in the middle of January trying to rent. That could have an adverse effect on any neighborhood that had multiple apartments vacant in January. So thank you, and I will be voting yes on this one.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. And rather than obviously take Councilor Baker, who offered the same amendment, I'm going to ask you formally to withdraw that one or to sign on to Councilor Wu's, which is the same language.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. That makes it a lot easier. So at this time, the amendment on each of your desks, there's one separate from Councilor Baker, another that is separate from Councilor Wu. We're going to fold those in together. It will be a joint amendment offered by Councilor Wu and Councilor Baker. It is a sunset provision. Is there a second to take a vote on this? There is a second to take a vote on this. At this time, all those in favor of adopting this proposed amendment by Councilor Baker and Councilor Wu, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll, I'm going to doubt the vote, but Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll on the sunset provision amendment offered by Councilor Wu and Councilor Baker. And we will get new language so that it's reflected that the amendment is offered by both of them.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, no, I know, but it's also Councilor Baker's.
So he's withdrawing.
Oh, thank you. All right. Counselor Baker.
Yes.
Counselor Baker, yes. Counselor Campbell.
Yes.
Counselor Campbell, yes. Counselor Siomo. Yes. Counselor Siomo, yes. Counselor Edwards. Counselor Edwards, yes. Counselor Asabi George. Yes. Counselor Asabi George, yes. Counselor Flaherty. No. Counselor Flaherty, no. Counselor Flynn. Yes. Counselor Flynn, yes. Counselor Janey. No. Counselor Janey, no. Counselor McCarthy. Yes. Counselor McCarthy, yes. Counselor O'Malley. Yes. Counselor O'Malley, yes. Counselor Presley. Yes. Counselor Presley, yes. Counselor Wu. Counselor Wu, yes. And Counselor Zachem. Counselor Zachem, yes. Madam President, the Second Amendment of Counselor Wu has received 11 votes in the affirmative and 2 votes in the negative.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Second Amendment offered jointly by Councilor Wu and Councilor Baker has been adopted.
So it is joint.
Moving on,
That's what I was trying to say.
Councilor Baker, you have another amendment? Yes. Madam Clerk, if you could read the other amendment offered by Councilor Baker.
Amendment of Councilor Frank Baker, docket number 0764, amended draft. Docket number 0764 as amended shall be further amended in the definition section 9-14.2 relating to the definition of the term owner-adjacent unit. The definition of owner-adjacent unit shall be amended by striking the words two-family or three-family dwellings in line 4 and inserting in place thereof the following words: 6 or fewer residential dwellings, and shall be amended in the line 6 by striking the words three-family residential dwellings and inserting in place thereof the following words: 3 to 6 unit residential dwellings. Filed in the council on June 13th, 2018.
Councilor Baker, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam President. Is this sausage making here?
This is. Here we
Good.
go.
Okay. So this amendment here is more for just consistency among our rental registration ordinance and our residential exemption. So if you receive a residential exemption, live into up to a 6-family, you're allowed to do 1 unit. I don't think we're going to come across very many people that are owner-occupied six-family dwellings. And again, more to just stay consistency with the rental registration ordinance and the residential exemption. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Is there a second on Councilor Baker's second? We have a second by Councilor Siomo. Okay. At this time, we will take a vote on the amendment offered by Councilor Baker. All those in favor say aye.
I think it's 5.
Any opposed say nay.
I think it's 5.
I'm going to doubt the vote. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll on Councilor Baker's proposed amendment?
On Councilor Baker's proposed Second Amendment on docket number 0764. Councilor Baker?
Yes.
Councilor Baker, yes. Councilor Campbell?
No.
Councilor Campbell, no. Councilor Siomo? Yes. Councilor Siomo, yes. Councilor Edwards? Councilor Edwards, no. Councilor Asabi George? Yes. Councilor Asabi George, yes. Councilor Flaherty? No. Councilor Flaherty, no. Councilor Flynn? No. Councilor Flynn, no. Councilor Janey? No. Councilor Janey, no. Councilor McCarthy? Yes. Councilor McCarthy, yes. Councilor O'Malley? No. Councilor O'Malley, no. Councilor Presley? No. Councilor Presley, no. Councilor Wu? No. Councilor Wu, no. And Councilor Zachem? No. Councilor Zachem, no. Madam President, we have 4 in the affirmative and 9 in the negative, and this Second Amendment fails.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The Second Amendment offered by Councilor Baker has failed. Moving on to Councilor Siomo. Madam Clerk, if you could read the offered amendment by Councilor Siomo into the record.
Sure. We're just trying to keep our paperwork together here.
No, take your time. Thank you.
Amendment of Councilor Mark Siomo, docket number 0764, amended draft. Docket number 0764, as amended, shall be further amended by adding a new subsection E in 9-14.14b relating to investor units. E shall read, investor units a residential unit offered as a short-term rental that is not the primary residence of the operator. Investor units shall be limited to buildings of 10 or more units, and an operator may offer his or her investor unit as a short-term rental for 365 days per year, provided that the total number of investor units per any single residential building do not exceed 5% of the total units. Filed in council on June 13th, 2018.
Councilor Siomo, you have the floor.
Thank you. Let me preface I'm going to add a little spice to the sausage because
Because you're Italian.
I'm Italian.
We
First,
love
let me
you.
thank Councilor Flaherty for all his work herding the cats here and getting to where we're actually voting on this today. I can't support the recommendation from the committee report without the investor units, because I believe, and I've said many times at the working sessions, and about unintended consequences that were brought up by both Councilor O'Malley and Councilor Wu. I see all the eligible units during our working session in order to protect downtown, which has a total of 419 owner-occupied 2 and 3 families in the 10 neighborhoods that make up the downtown core, 419. In the neighborhoods, my neighborhood, Frank, a little south of 17,000. Councilor Wu expressed one of my biggest fears, that there's going to be agents out there contacting every owner-occupant, trying to get them to list. They'll do all the work. I don't see how we get around that without having competition. I believe we're creating an imbalance in the market. 419 in the downtown core versus 17,000 in the neighborhoods. Economically, I think that's bad imbalance. And the imbalance of, well, let me regroup. So the most affordable housing in our city is in the neighborhoods, in 2 and 3 families. We're incentivizing a new business model without having any competition, any downtown availability in units, whether they're big building, 100-unit buildings or whatever, and they're able to do 5 units. Less impactful on everybody's neighborhood and create some competition economically. So I would also say that putting many hardworking people who are tied to the short-term rental business right now, we're going to be eliminating jobs. And then finally, when we start talking about enforcing days, I still can't be satisfied with what I've heard from DO-IT or ISD, how we're going to count days. How we're going to know if somebody goes to Florida for 3 weeks and lets their apartment empty and throws in an Airbnb for a couple of weeks. How do we do that? I want sensible regulation, but I also think we need competition from buildings, where people go into buildings, if they're actually impacting the building, our neighborhoods don't feel that impact. If we take away that competition entirely, we're going to feel it in every one of our neighborhoods, and we're going to be getting calls from everybody on our residential streets with people walking up and down with suitcases. So I can't vote for this recommendation without some measure of competition from the investor class. Let me say, we are all horrified when we hear the anecdotal stories of landlords vacating, evicting tenants to make it a de facto hotel. That should be addressed in zoning and in use. We don't have to address it through Airbnb legislation. So I have no illusion that this is going to pass, but I felt it was necessary to explain why I am putting this forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. Wait, nope, none of that. Thank you. Councilor Baker, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Siomo. I believe this amendment takes a systems thinking approach, as once we allow owners of small units to rent 365 days, which I think we should, and ban investing units, this will likely remove most, if not all, short-term rentals in certain neighborhoods, creating an uneven playing field. By allowing a very small amount of investor units throughout the city, it disperses the numbers of STRs throughout the city to many areas. I'm concerned that completely eliminating investor units will push all the short-term rentals out of downtown and into the surrounding neighborhoods, where the most affordable housing exists today, therefore limiting the affordable housing. Totally eliminating investor units will be counterproductive to what some say we are trying to do here, create more affordable housing. Allowing 5% of buildings with 10 or more units to be used as an STR spread out the options and will help to preserve affordable housing in the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor McCarthy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I want to thank Councilor Siomo for putting this forward. And I do want to thank Councilor Flaherty. I know everybody's given him a ton of thanks, but he's worked awfully hard on this. So agree with him, disagree with him, like him, hate him, or indifferent. He's worked his butt off putting this together. So we do certainly appreciate that. And this goes back to what Councilor O'Malley had said earlier about the consequences, the unintended consequences. When Airbnb started to pop up, I'll be the first to admit, when we started looking at the platforms within our office, I'm a District 5 city councilor, Hyde Park, Rosendale, Mattapan. Wasn't really aware of a huge issue. We had maybe several complaints, nothing big. There's south of 3,700 people on the platform just in Rosendale alone. My District 5 is all 2 families and 3 families. And a little bit of competition may help us from keeping our families to have to leave. So I agree with Mark, and I'll be voting in the affirmative.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Councilor O'Malley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I kind of now regret that my amendment capping the days happened at the beginning, because I think I've heard agreement from several of my folks into this will indeed, as it's written, push the issue out more into the neighborhoods. I thought a 120 cap would address that. In all due respect, I do not think having a 5% STR allowance in buildings will address that or address some of the unintended consequences that have been discussed. I think that the way this is written is a little ill-conceived, and I don't know practically how it would be enforced. So perhaps through you to the maker, who determines which 5% of units in a building would be allowed for STR? Is it first come, first serve? Is it based on who's ever lived there the longest? It seems to me that this would be extraordinarily difficult to actually enforce, and that is why I will be voting against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor Siomo, you want to address?
So as far as enforcement, if a landlord has a 100-unit building, they can choose what 5 apartments. They can do a studio, I don't think we care. When we try to enforce no more than 4, we came up with the University Accountability Report by address. My concern has always been, when we start counting days, who's going to be sitting at the computer looking at how many days that one is advertised on this platform and advertised on that platform? I think if we get the short-term rental platforms to provide us a university accountability-like report that gives us addresses and basically by address, that's how we would enforce it. I hope that clarifies. And one other thing, particularly in Allston Brighton, I failed to mention, we have a high student population. A lot of our housing stock goes to student rentals. I see a model that 9 months a year, from August through May, will have student rentals, and then Airbnb June, July, and August. It's actually a pretty good way to make a lot of money off one owner. And again, it's owner-occupied. I get that. I'm an owner-occupant. But I think it really perverts the market. So I just wanted to also say how I think it particularly affects Allston Brighton. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. At this time, is there a second to take a vote on Councilor Siomo's proposed amendment?
Second.
Madam Clerk, if you could reflect that there is a second from Councilor Baker. At this time, all those in favor of Councilor Siomo's proposed amendment say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Nay. The nays have it. The proposed amendment by Councilor Siomo has failed. Councilor McCarthy, moving on to Councilor McCarthy's proposed amendment. Madam Clerk, if you could read a piece of what Councilor McCarthy submitted as his proposed amendment into the record, that would be helpful.
Offered by City Councilor Timothy McCarthy, an ordinance amending ordinance section 9-14, allowing short-term residential rentals in the City of Boston. Section 1 of the City of Boston Code Ordinances, Section 9-14.2, is hereby amended by striking the definition of the term operator and inserting in place thereof the following definitions. There are definitions of operator: a natural person who is the owner or tenant of the residential unit that he or she seeks to offer as short-term rental. Only one owner or tenant may be registered as an operator of the short-term rental registry for residential units, and it shall be unlawful for any person, even if that person meets the qualifications of primary resident, to offer a residential unit for short-term residential rentals. Would you like me to read on? I'm happy to.
Sure.
So just a point of clarification, Councilor McCarthy, you're offering one proposed amendment?
Correct.
Okay, and that is what the Madam Clerk has read?
Yep. And
Or
I'm
does that
going to
capture-
continue to read?
That captured it.
That captures it.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
It's quite long. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councilor McCarthy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I am not a lawyer. I did not play one on TV, and I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express. So I'm just going to go anecdotally and cover exactly what this means. Basically what this is that if, as a two-family, I own a two-family myself. If my renter, we talk about equity in our neighborhoods. If my renter is a fantastic renter and he or she, the family, are trying to go to Disney World, if they go to Disney World for the week, with my permission, they should be able to Airbnb their apartment for that time period when they're gone. Simply put, everybody's struggling. We talk about how high the rents are, and if this can help a family get away for a week, and the operator, the owner of that home, is happy with those rentals and feels comfortable about that, I think that with a written agreement within that home, they should be able to do so.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. Councilor Flaherty, you have the floor. All set, Councilor Flaherty?
Yep.
Councilor Sabi George, you have the floor.
I have a question through the chair. At the end of Councilor McCarthy's amendment, there is a note that says Section 5, this ordinance shall take effect upon passage.
So what
I just don't.
you're questioning Section 5, correct? Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. So what I'm going to do is take a brief recess because this has different sections and pull out the section that Councilor McCarthy is speaking to make sure that's crystal clear. And then we'll come back with paperwork based on what you just said to make sure that's crystal clear in the language written. Just for a point of clarification, so Councilor McCarthy, we're going to strike Section 5, which is in the written language of Councilor McCarthy's amendment and creates a little bit of confusion. We don't need it, so we're going to strike Section 5 of the proposed amendment. Is anyone else looking to speak on the amendment offered by Councilor McCarthy? Okay, so at this time, is there a second to take a vote on the amendment offered by Councilor McCarthy? Second. Please reflect that there is a second by Councilor Baker. All those in favor say aye. Any opposed say nay. Nay. Madam Clerk, I'm going to doubt the vote because I couldn't really understand what that was. So at this point, if you could call the roll for Councilor McCarthy's proposed amendment, that would be great.
I think it was cookie talk. Councilor Baker? Yes. Councilor Baker, yes. Councilor Campbell?
Yes.
Councilor Campbell, yes. Councilor Siomo? Yes. Councilor Edwards? No. Councilor Edwards? Councilor Siomo, yes. Councilor Edwards, no. Councilor Sabi George?
Madam Clerk, I apologize. My vote should have been a no. I apologize. I said yes.
That's quite all right.
Thank you. Sorry
It's been
about that.
a long day.
Sorry, Councilor.
Councilor Sabi George? Councilor Sabi George,
My
no.
apologies.
Councilor Flaherty? Councilor Flaherty, no. Councilor Flynn? Councilor Flynn, no. Councilor Janey? No. Councilor Janey, no. Councilor McCarthy? Yes. Counselor McCarthy, yes. Counselor O'Malley? No. Counselor O'Malley, no. Counselor Presley? No. No. Counselor Wu? Counselor Wu, no. And Counselor Zachem? No. Counselor Zachem, no. Madam President, Counselor McCarthy's amendment on docket 0764 has failed. It's received 3 votes in the affirmative and 10 votes in the negative.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Councilor McCarthy's proposed amendment has failed. At this time, for points of clarification. So right now, I have 3 amendments before me that have passed. One offered by Councilor Wu, the other offered jointly by Councilor Wu and Councilor Baker, and another offered by Councilor O'Malley. At this time, we are going to amend what Councilor Flaherty, who is the chairman of the Committee on Government Operations, has offered. And these amendments will be included into that proposed legislation. And at this time, we are going to vote on the amended version. So that means we're going to be voting on the short-term rentals proposal that has these 3 amendments as a whole. So I'm going to ask that just out of courtesy, Councilor Flaherty, as the chairman of the Committee on Government Operations, do you wish to say anything else?
No, just a continued commitment and pledge as we gather the data and get more information as this thing continues to evolve. Again, case of first impression, we're going to be regulating an industry. Have no idea whether these anecdotal stories and/or there's going to be further evidence, but I know that we work closely with the Mayor's Office and Inspectional Services. We will actually have the data, and then we'll be able to adjust from there. Could be a situation where we may have gone too far and we need to retreat. Maybe a situation where we need to go a little further. So time will tell that. But the commitment as chair will be to continue to work with folks as we roll this out and work with the administration to see if we got it right. And if we did, great. And if we didn't, then we have the ability to come back to this very floor and hash out the details. So appreciate everyone's involvement. This was obviously great work by all of our colleagues, as well as our advocates that were out there. Obviously, ADCO did great with producing some information. The administration, of course, and the Hotel Workers Union. Everyone participated and played a role. Hopefully, everyone feels that their issues and concerns were given a fair hearing and were addressed, objectively. And our hope is we'll just continue to work together and move forward as we move our city forward. So, thank you, and look forward as chair to move for passage in the new draft as amended.
Perfect.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Councilor Sabi George, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and I too would like to thank Councilor Flaherty for his work and effort over the last few months on what we're voting on today, and for the effort of my colleagues for the amendments that were presented today. The one piece that is very frustrating to me is that we did not have an additional working session before today to consider these motions, to have an open conversation about these motions, and to allow the public an opportunity to present their positions, their thoughts on the amendments that we had before us today, both those that were passed and were not passed. We did, since the last working session, have 15 working days that we could have had an additional session. So although I will be voting in the affirmative to support today's order as amended, I am very frustrated, very disappointed that we did not have another opportunity to discuss this as colleagues in an open forum with the amendments that were before us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. Councilor Janey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and many thanks to all of my colleagues and the mayor and his administration. A special thank you to Councilor Flaherty for his leadership on this issue. I know that this has not been easy. We've had a 4-hour or 5-hour hearing. We've had working sessions. I agree it would have been helpful to have yet another working session to consider all of the amendments. But I also want to offer my deep gratitude to all of the residents, all of the neighborhood groups, all of the advocacy organizations for their engagement on this issue, which was very meaningful and helped inform my thinking. And I think that we have a better ordinance for it. I do plan on voting yes. I think inaction is not an option, that we need to do something to reel this in. I'm particularly grateful that we have addressed the investor units and that we have eliminated the investor units. That was very important to me. It was also very important, though, that we would recognize and provide some protection to the small owner occupants. And I've heard from several people throughout the city and certainly throughout my district who are using short-term rentals as an opportunity to earn additional income, whether it be some of our elderly who are trying to pay off their mortgages, someone who wants to maybe start a business. I've even heard from residents in my district who use a short-term rental to help subsidize a long-term tenant so that they don't have to charge a market rate rent. So I think it was really important for me to kind of strike that balance around getting rid of the investor units, which we've done. I certainly appreciate the amendments that have been offered, particularly one on the data and the reporting. I think that is a very important piece as we move forward to really understand what the impact of this will be on our city and by neighborhood. I know in my particular district, there aren't even that many that are eligible, and so I know there's a deep concern that the downtown demand will move its way into our neighborhoods. I think it's going to be really important for us to monitor this going forward. So again, I just wanted to commend my colleagues, certainly the chair of GovOps, and all of the public for their engagement. I literally have received thousands of emails on this issue. So I appreciate all the work that has been done, and I'm glad that we're moving forward in such a way that eliminates the investor units but still offers protection for the little guy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Janey. Councilor Flynn, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important issue which affects every neighborhood across the city. I'd like to thank Mayor Walsh for his leadership. I'd like to thank City Councilor Michael Flaherty for his leadership on this issue, and also to my colleagues on the City Council for their contributions to the policy discussions we have held over the recent months. I would also like to thank the members of the public who passionately presented their position to us. I'd like to thank everyone who called or emailed my office from my district and throughout the city. I support this ordinance on Airbnb and short-term rentals, and I believe it will strike a reasonable balance to regulate the industry. It will work to regulate investor units in Boston and allow owner-occupants to participate in short-term rental activities. I first became aware of the impact short-term rentals have on local communities when my friend, Mr. Hen Yin Yi, invited me to take a walking tour of rentals throughout Chinatown last year. He brought a friend of his who had been displaced due to entire buildings being purchased by large corporations and turned into short-term rentals called investor units. These investor units were essentially unregulated mini hotels, often with absentee landlords. Mr. Yi and his friend showed me hundreds of these units. They said these were previously occupied by working-class immigrants and their families, many of them low-wage workers. This directly affected the quality of life of residents. Not only were they displaced from their homes, but they were separated from family, friends, and their local health care and social providers. I proudly represent District 2. Chinatown is a big part of District 2. My family and I have always had strong ties to this community. I graduated from high school there. My son attends school there currently. I have seen this great American neighborhood change dramatically since I first attended school there in 1983. Since last fall, I have issued multiple statements about investor units and their impact on housing, the rental market, and local residents. I have also worked to raise concerns regarding public safety, inspection, and quality of life issues like trash removal, noise, and parking. I've heard from residents across District 2, the Back Bay, Bay Village, Chinatown, downtown, Fort Point, the South End, Beacon Hill, South Boston, and the waterfront, all expressing their support for regulations of short-term rentals, and I have received nearly 600 emails or calls on this topic. In the midst of our current affordable housing crisis and concerns regarding our current housing stock, it has been my position that we should phase out investor units. Outside of Boston City Hall, there is a plaque that was dedicated in 1991, and it's important to me in a lot of families across Boston, and it talks about Boston's proud immigrant community. I support this ordinance and regulation of short-term rentals, so we may ensure that areas like Chinatown remain a neighborhood of working-class immigrants. I want to ensure that immigrant workers and longtime residents will not be pushed out of Boston. I want to defend our communities from investor speculation and protect the fabric of our neighborhoods. Regulation of short-term rental is not anti-innovation. We must now lead to address concerns in our city when it comes to short-term rental platforms. I'm proud to work with my colleagues on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Presley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll lend my voice to the echo chamber here in thanking our steward of this effort, Chairman Flaherty, for your due diligence. I want to thank Councillor Wu and Councillor Edwards, and I want to thank each and every one of our colleagues. And I certainly want to thank the indefatigable residents and advocates, this broad and diverse coalition of folks who have sojourned for so long. You know, last night I joined many of my colleagues here in attending a Make Boston Affordable community meeting and rally at the Boston Teachers Union, co-sponsored by MAHA and GBIO. 400 concerned residents on a Tuesday night showed up, representing every walk of life. They showed up with tough questions and real concerns, genuine frustration and fear of displacement. And they showed up to extend their hands in partnership and shared work, while also demanding bolder solutions and greater accountability of their elected officials. Towards the end of the meeting, everyone recited, "We're in this together." And indeed we are. This crisis, this affordable housing crisis, is a public health crisis. And it is one that is affecting every person in every corner of our city. I don't think it would be too far-reaching to even assert that there are people in this chamber who have been a part of these advocacy efforts and this coalition who are couch surfing themselves, who are living out of cars, who are living in shelters throughout this city. So after receiving hundreds of calls and emails, I plan to support the mayor's ordinance today without question. Short-term rentals are contributing to this public health crisis and epidemic that is the affordable housing crisis, and without regulation or data collection stands to become an even larger contributor to displacement. The need for more housing that is affordable remains a top concern for every neighborhood, and we must continue to organize, to mobilize, to author and to pass legislation which strikes at the heart of this crisis, which is only growing, destabilizing families and communities, and threatening the health of our workforce and our economy. And it is ultimately not just about political will, it is about legislation. We made great strides in passing the rental inspection ordinance. I think there's work that remains to be done to increase the IDP, to pass comprehensive measures like the Jim Brooks Stabilization Act, tenants' right of first refusal. And I personally hope we will explore real estate transfer fees, which were recently passed in Somerville. Ultimately, I believe this ordinance strikes the right balance, and I hope that we can capitalize on all of the energy that went into this ordinance and keep the focus on whatever levers we have to pull and whatever measures we have to draft to keep Boston affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Presley. At this time, I quickly want to thank, besides Councillor Flaherty and Councillor Wu and Councillor Edwards for their leadership, I have to thank Christine from our central staff. She did a lot of work on this. There were a lot of emails and amendments that came into our inboxes, but the point person for the council was Christine, who took all of that, processed that, answered questions from constituents about what all this meant, the legality of it all. And we often don't thank our staff. So Christine, thank you for your leadership on this. Thank you for your hard work. I appreciate you, and I know we appreciate you. So thank you. Before we take a vote, Councillor Flynn?
Yeah, Madam President, may I?
For what purpose do you rise?
I rise to move to reconsider my vote on Councilor O'Malley's amendment. Second. On the
Okay, this was reconsideration of the...
Yeah, reconsideration.
At this time, Councillor Flynn moves for reconsideration of his vote on Councillor O'Malley's proposed amendment related to the data requirements and the reporting,
No, it's the cap.
the 120-day cap?
Yes.
Which failed? Okay.
Yeah, I just want to go on the record as voting yes.
Okay. And previously, I'm assuming you voted no.
Yes.
Any objections? At this time, Madam Clerk, can you reflect that the Councillor Flynn's vote has been changed on Councillor O'Malley's proposed amendment, 120-day cap that failed?
Thank you, Madam President.
No problem. Thank you, Councillor Flynn. At this time, we are going to take a vote on docket 0764. And we're going to take a vote to... Councillor O'Malley, it changes nothing. It only changes, for point of clarification, it changes the record for Councillor Flynn, who, like me, actually said a vote that was incorrect, probably because we were going so fast.
It was 6 in favor, though.
But it has not changed the outcome.
Yeah.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, would any other colleagues?
Thank you, Councillor O'Malley, and thank you for bringing the laughter. And quickly, before we take this vote, I want to just say one thing. I want to thank all of my colleagues for working really hard with the administration. I also want to thank them, Chief Dillon and her team for the hard work, Buddy Christopher and many of our commissioners for their hard work. All of my colleagues work really hard on behalf of their constituents and on behalf of their residents every single day. And one of the things that frustrated me the most during this process was when we would often shape the issue as if it was black and white. This was not a black and white issue, it was complex. And as today's council meeting demonstrates, it was a complex issue with many sides and many perspectives. And what is important is that electeds listen to all of those perspectives, give people time and energy to be able to express that and to truly listen. I want to thank my colleagues for doing that, but I also want to make sure that the public is fully aware that this is not easy work that we do. And to suggest that when you take on an issue that you might vote yes is voting for residents and against residents if you vote no, or that it's corporations against the residents, all of us who are elected who sit in this chamber care about our residents in our district. We may disagree on issues, and that's okay. We won't always agree, but we're all in this for our residents. So a vote yes means we just have a different perspective. A vote no means we have a different perspective. But it does not mean we don't care about the residents in the city of Boston. I wanted to make that point very clear because I respect each and every one of my colleagues for the work they do every single day. So at this time, we're going to take a vote on docket 0764, and we are going to vote to reject the recommendation of the committee report that asked us to adopt the proposed version, and instead vote on this new draft with the 3 amendments that we discussed earlier. At this time, Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll.
On docket number 0764, with new draft and 3 amendments of Councillor O'Malley's second draft, Councillor Baker's and Wu, and Councillor Wu. Councillor Baker? No. Councillor Baker? No. Councillor Campbell?
Yes.
Councillor Campbell, yes. Councillor Siomo? No. Councillor Siomo, no. Councillor Edwards? Yes. Councillor Edwards, yes. Councillor Asabi George? Yes. Councillor Asabi George, yes. Councillor Flaherty? Yes. Councillor Flaherty, yes. Councillor Flynn? Yes. Councillor Flynn, yes. Councillor Janey? Yes. Councillor Janey, yes. Councillor McCarthy? Yes. Councillor McCarthy, yes. Councillor O'Malley? Yes. Councillor O'Malley, yes. Councillor Presley? Yes. Councillor Presley, yes. Councillor Wu? Yes. Councillor Wu, yes. And Councillor Zachem? Yes. Councillor Zachem, yes. For the final vote on docket number 0764, there are 11 votes in favor and 2 votes in opposition. The docket number 0764 Passes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Docket 0764 and a new draft with 3 amendments has passed. And thank you to the folks who attended the council meeting. Thank you very much for today.